There's a learning curve there. It's the first time you've been on your own as a young adult. You're away from your parents and you have all these influences, whether it's your friends, whether it's social events, partying, sporting events. You're living the college lifestyle. I leaned into all that thinking I could still do right academically, but I didn't realize I was hurting my GPA. And the GPA is one of the number one things that you need to focus on for med school and law school.
Lawyer Nik and I have talked about things that we have done wrong, and we didn't allow it to define us, but we only allowed it to make us stronger and better. We rose up from that, because sometimes when you fail an exam or maybe you don't get in on the first try, some people then curl up into a ball and they're like, you know what, the world is against, they can't pull themselves out. And so it's really important to find that resilience, because guess what? Law school is not easy, medical school is not easy. It only gets harder from there.
Medicine,
Law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
one doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Medico-Legal Brief, where medicine meets the law. Lawyer Nik with Dr. Long. And if you haven't already, please go like, subscribe, and follow. We are on YouTube. We're on Spotify. We are on TikTok. We're on Instagram. We're on all the socials. We like engaging with you guys. We like hearing what our listeners have to say. Please leave a comment. Let us know what you want to hear about in the future. We have a pretty good episode today, and it's going back to career advice and education and resume bolstering. And so today we're going to talk about how you as an individual can put yourself in the best possible position to get into law school or get into med school.
And we've had brief conversations about this in the past, but the episodes where we talk about getting into medical school, into law school, it seemed to do really well. So I wanted to emphasize that and go into more detail just to make sure that we let our perspective known.
Definitely. And to find a starting position, we've been out of school for a long time. We haven't applied to a place of higher learning in a while. And in some extent, we are on the other end with being adjunct professors and teaching others and teaching students. So it's been wild to see how things have evolved and how things have progressed as far as admissions go. When I talk to students nowadays, sometimes I joke, okay, if I was applying now with my resume, I may not have gotten into the school I got into. And so just the differences and revisiting those factors, some things are always going to be the same, but things have definitely gotten different in this day and age with access to information and YouTube videos and podcasts and the internet. People are a lot more aware of what it takes to get into school as well as who their direct competition is.
I agree with you. The same applies to medicine and getting into medical school nowadays. It's much more competitive. But I'm curious whether or not you feel the same about college, because I actually think college, from what I've seen, it's actually more accessible now. A lot of people just assume that they are going to be going into college, where it is harder to stand out is getting financial aid, scholarships, and that's where the difficulties come and lie. And that's where most people who are trying to reach for a tuition-free education, they have to work a little harder. They have to build a better resume. They have to do a little bit more to stand out.
To your point about college, when my parents were coming up, a high school diploma was all you needed. You could go get your high school diploma. In some instances, you didn't even need a high school diploma. You could drop out and go start your own business or go be a tradesperson, a tradesman or a tradeswoman, and go as an electrician or a plumber or a truck driver. You didn't necessarily need a high school diploma. Back in the day, you could drop out and still be successful. You could go get your high school diploma and go into the workforce and still be successful. When we were growing up, it was you need to go to college. There was no other option. And then from there, you've talked about being first generation in our family to go to higher education. It's eye-opening. You're trying to navigate something that your parents didn't necessarily do. And so there's a lot of new things coming your way and a lot of learning, no pun intended. But nowadays, to your point, everybody just accepts the fact that they need to go get a bachelor's degree, at least. And in most corporate jobs, in most grad school applications, you need to have the bachelor's degree. It's a requirement. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that our generation, the millennial generation, it was very much education, higher education, college, graduate school. I do think that there is starting to see a little shift. Our generation now are raising kids who we are urging them to maybe be the most efficient about their time, maybe not spend all the money on education only to come out and do something that maybe you don't enjoy. Maybe it's a career that doesn't have as much earning potential. And I know that in our doctor firms, and I've talked about this in the past in other episodes, but but a lot of the doctors are actually pushing their kids into trade school because it's something that's always needed. And the amount of time that you put in for education, the ROI on it is so much better than actually becoming a physician sometimes, because majority of physicians, we go into it and there's just a lot of student debt, and having to come out and deal with all the responsibilities, the red tape. It actually sometimes isn't that worth it for some people.
And obviously, having a trade, who 99.9% of the time need a license. Just like a doctor or a lawyer needs a license, if you're going to go be a master electrician, you need a license there as well. There's also the ability for people to go into careers and make money where the bachelor's degree is not necessarily a barrier to entry. You can go learn how to trade stocks by reading books and watching videos, and essentially you could be a day trader from your bedroom. You could learn how to go be an entrepreneur and learn how to cook and open up a coffee shop or open up a vintage resale business like my wife. You can do all these things without having a formal education-based training. You can just seek out mentors and seek out videos and seek out information and skip the whole process. But that's definitely not what we're talking about here today. We're talking about how do you get into law school and med school. Back to re-baselining, education, at least for me, peaked up in high school with, hey, you need to go to college. And then once you get to college, you could figure out what you want to do afterwards. So if I'm looking back on teenage Nik, I was focused on how can I best put myself in a situation or position to get into a good college, whatever at the time a good college was.
Yep. And same for me, I had already known that medical school was the ultimate goal. But getting into college, getting into a good college, and trying to get as many scholarships as I could was really important, because I knew that my family was not going to be able to help with any of those educational costs. For me, I wanted to make sure that I had that resume built. Even going from high school into college, you're looking to be very expansive. You want to be well-rounded. You don't want to just have the grades, but you want to show the college board that you do other things outside of academics. And so I had a lot to do with art. I had always done studio art, and honestly since elementary school, but I really honed in those skills in high school. And so I did 4 years in art. I did AP classes. I did a portfolio, submitted all of that. So I did everything revolving around art and got some credit during my time in high school. But I also played tennis. I did that for about 3 years. I quit the last half of my senior year because of other obligations and because my parents didn't really want me doing that. But that's a whole nother story. But those were those extracurriculars that I maintained in high school to make sure that I was not only well-rounded, but kept me sane in terms of all the studying or all the academic opportunities that I was already pursuing.
Extracurriculars are very important in high school, not only just as, like you said, a break from the daily grind of reading AP bio or chemistry or going through world geography, but there's a lot of people skills that come with that, where regardless of what you're doing, you're learning how to work with other people that may not be like you. You're able to see diversity, you're able to get a lot of other opinions, and you're able to get feedback too. Feedback from your teachers, feedback from your peers. Obviously, we went to the same high school and we had some overlap. So I found art late in my career, but I did play sports. I played basketball and football. Not the entire 4 years I was in high school, but there were a few years that I did that. And I also, did things outside of school. I had a job where I was a referee and a lifeguard at a YMCA. I also did other things sports wise. I played basketball and I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then I also found things within the school, National Honor Society or debate things that would come up. Sometimes just throwing your hat in the ring was good enough to say, I did it and put it on my resume. So there are other areas like that I try to make myself well-rounded. With high school, that helps lay the foundation for college, which is the most important thing. When I started working in high school at 16 at the YMCA, I ended up holding that job all through college, to where by the time I hit sophomore year in college, I was an aquatics coordinator and I was a lead ref, and I was able to leverage that on my college resume because I had now been there for 4 years. So applying to law school, they were able to see that I had been with a corporation, the YMCA, or an organization, I should say, I had dedicated myself. I was a leader. I was this, that, and the other. Same thing with sports, because I was able to do athletics throughout high school and even middle school, that when I got to college, I was able to engage in intramurals and engage in tournaments. And I was able to put those things on my resume to show some of my personality as to what my interests were. High school definitely helps lay down some foundational skills and some building blocks that you actually lean on a lot in college.
The other thing in high school is that you get a lot of homework. As you were talking, I realized that, hey, we actually are so far removed that the last time I actually had homework to be done was high school. You are constantly assigned tasks to complete, which really sets you up to prepare to apply for college, because there are a lot of things that you have to go through the application process, whether that's completing essays, submitting the actual application on time. The idea behind all of that is that you're given a deadline and you want to make sure you meet that deadline or submit it early. With college applications, with any application for higher education, it's really important to try to meet that deadline. But if you're able to do it early, it usually gives you an advantage, especially in medical school. The earlier that you get your name in the ring, they're able to review your chart, and you may go on the interview list sooner than you realize. That really sets the foundation for getting into college. But I think the writing skills were really important for me getting whatever scholarship I was able to get, because the more essays that I was able to write and pursue, I was able to open up many opportunities of scholarships and grants I was able to receive and achieve. And I even hounded that even more in my little brother, because he was not a writer at all. He did not enjoy that. But because I made him write so many essays, he actually got a full ride, cumulatively with everything combined, for his college tuition. I only got a couple thousand, but still, it's just a very important skill to have as you grow through your high school years to get into college, and to be able to afford college.
And that's something a lot of people don't realize is, again, building blocks. By setting up your high school resume to achieve things in college. Obviously, the big achievement is getting into college. The second biggest achievement is usually getting into the school, the major of your choice. And then the third biggest achievement is getting a scholarship. When you get those scholarships awarded to you in college, then out of your college resume that you submit, you can then say you were a recipient of A, B, C, and D scholarship during college, which then each education system is then vouching for the previous education system as to why you are a good candidate.
Constantly building on that building block, like you said. And even as we go through the skill set, once you get into college, you're still getting some homework, but it's not as much as high school. Now you're starting to rely more on tests and exams. You're getting these bigger exams that weigh more on your grade. And that is setting you up for law school and medical school, because we didn't have any homework at all in medical school. It was literally, you get a 6 to 8 week course and you're taking either 1 or 2 exams, and those 1 or 2 exams determine whether or not you pass that class. So you better pass. Going into college, it starts to get a little bit more difficult to study, trying to figure out your study habits and trying to figure out how you're going to maintain those grades so that it prepares you well for your professional school.
Yeah, law school is very similar, very, very little homework, if any. For some specialization classes, you might have some homework. In litigation drafting, you might have every week you're drafting something to show to the professor. But for the most part, with our core classes, it was the exact same thing. You had 6 to 8 weeks of class time, and then at the end, there was a final exam, and your grade hindered on that one final exam. So if you failed, you failed. If you passed, you passed. And you were lucky if you got a class that gave you a midterm over the course of, that semester. You're responsible for everything. You're responsible for memorizing everything and putting it back into the test in a manner that's acceptable. There's multiple choice questions out there, which are good, but the essays, writing is important. And not to segue, I think that kids these days, right, I hate to say that, but we've done it ourselves. Writing might be becoming a lost art due to AI. When we're writing copy for our social media or for our YouTube, we lean a lot into AI on how can we be more creative. What are some keywords that we can use, so on and so forth. And I know that students do that with college and high school. There's so much plagiarism via AI that there's software out there to detect plagiarism. You have built a good skill and you instilled that in your brother. Writing is really, really important. You can't really hide that, but AI might be making it a little too easy, and it's like becoming maybe a lost art.
I also think that you gotta evolve with the times.
Yeah.
AI is here. Even on our episode of AI, which was a couple months ago, since then, AI has had a bigger influence in my job and my work life. And that's only been a couple months on what AI can do. I recently joined as a faculty position over at the residency here, and I am noticing AI is being used a lot more for notes, for patient care. It's something that you're either gonna fight against and you're gonna be that old guy that doesn't want to learn to type. Our age growing up is that a lot of the older folks didn't want to learn to type because they said keyboards, computers, that's not the way to go. But here we are. Everything is engulfed in computers and electronics. This is that next evolution, is that AI is going to be used. Yes, the lost art of writing. I don't know if it's a bad or a good thing, but it's something that we need to accept and evolve with it. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind.
It almost reminds me of writing in cursive. I get cards from my grandmother and she writes in cursive, and I'm looking at it and I know how to write in cursive, but I'm trying to decipher what it is because I'm just so used to looking at text on a screen, whether it's a text message, an email. You have to evolve. Getting to a point where I think the people that were opposed to it are now the ones maybe leaning in and saying, hey, you guys need to learn this skill. You need to learn how to do it. But there's still pushback as to what you were saying. But you're in college, you have been accepted to the University of Texas, and we've talked about our paths. You understand that you're going to go to med school. At what point did it register with you that you need to start putting yourself in a position to be competitive against the other peers that would also be applying to medical school?
First day of college. Like I said, if this is the route you go, you have to make sure that you're doing well. I mean, this is when I started thinking about it, which was, gosh, almost 15, 20 years ago. It was already competitive then, and it's only more competitive now. If you are someone that decides on medicine late, you're going to have to spend a couple more years to build up your GPA, build up your resume, because you have to stand out. You have to be competitive in that way. And so, first day there, when we started in college, we got to enjoy a lot of things, but I was always reserved in terms of going too far or having too much fun. I always had to make sure that I laid out time, enough time to study, enough time to do well in my courses. But it was also important that I had some sort of outlet because I didn't want to burn out early on in my educational career. I wanted to make sure that I had well balanced work and education and fun time.
I did not do that. I don't know if you ever knew this, but my first semester of college, I actually almost failed out of a biology class, which in high school, I had never failed a class. We were both top of our class. We were both in the top 10% of our high school. We were both extremely successful academically. So going into college, I actually underestimated it. And I said, oh, how hard could it be? I take some notes. I do what I did in high school, which is cram the night before, pull an all-nighter. I'll get to the exam and I'll do well. And even when I would go to the exam, I would walk out feeling really, really good about certain tests. And then I would get the grade back. I'm like, what did I do wrong? First semester, I feel like a lot of people don't really take this into consideration. Yeah, there's a learning curve there. You're adjusting to a new life. Most of the time, it's the first time you've been on your own as a young adult. You're away from your parents and you have all these influences, whether it's your friends, new friends, whether it's social events, whether it's partying, whether it's sporting events, whether it's just college events. You're living the college lifestyle. I leaned into all that thinking I could still do right academically, but I didn't realize I was hurting my GPA. And the GPA is one of the number one things that you need to focus on for med school and law school. It is the great divider to get that barrier to entry. You have to get past the GPA requirements. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would have taken my GPA a lot more seriously because what I did in that first semester from an average perspective definitely made me have to work harder over the next 3 years to try to bring that GPA back up.
Well, I didn't mean to miscommunicate. So I agree. I think GPA is very important. I knew it was important from the get-go. Doesn't mean I applied everything into skill because just like you, I very much underestimated that very first set of exams. We were enjoying our time. I was enjoying freedom from my parents who were very over my shoulders in high school. But my very first test, I was taking about 4 classes at that time. I wanted to make sure that I could acclimate. But on my first round of exams, my total score across all 4 exams didn't even hit 90.
Oh, wait, across
I
all
know.
four?
All 4. I made maybe like a 50 on one and like a 20 or 10, 15. It was eye-opening because like you said, transitioning from studying in high school where a lot of your grade is revolved around homework. It's small little tasks that you can complete that are easy, going into an exam where it's it's now 25, 30% of your grade, was nerve-wracking. So I was able to recover, however, by the end of the semester. That first shock of that first exam really kicked my butt into gear, and I was like, okay, I really need to start to calm down the social stuff and really focus in on the educational stuff. So there was that transition time, and that's why I want to have this conversation, because hopefully it lends our viewers that you really need to step into it with eyes wide open and understanding how important it is to maintain not only the social life and extracurriculars, but you do need to make sure that you have that first line of scores and grades, because if you don't have that score, they're going to filter you right out, even if you're very well-rounded everywhere else.
And that social life and those extracurriculars are important. We will talk about that. Being able to be socially aware and socially adept is really important in anything that you get into. But to your point, we would sometimes let social life come first. I remember we would go to the library and say, we're going to go study. And we would go to the loud floor and it was social hour. We wouldn't really study. We'd have our books out in front of us, but we'd be looking at, YouTube had just come out. We look at YouTube videos. We'd be listening to music. We'd be making friends with people. It wasn't a study session, but we try to justify it as we're in the library. We have our books in front of us. We're studying. We could have done a lot better that first semester, but we had our redemption. We ended up turning things around. So after your first semester, you give yourself the feedback, you have a self-assessment, you take a good, hard, long look in the mirror and say, all right, I need to change things. What was the buildup after that? Where did you go from there to start making yourself competitive again without the GPA difficulties you had had the first semester?
After that initial hurdle of the academics, I was able to get into this coasting phase from studying. I was able to figure out my studying habits, how much time I needed to study prior to an exam, how was I going to process everything. And so I felt like I got that down pretty good. But if you can remember, I was very much an introvert. That was really the other half of the skill set that I was trying to advance and excel at. Is I was trying to step out of my comfort zone, going out more so that I could learn to socialize, so that I could have conversations, because that is what you do in medicine, is that you're having conversations with strangers every single day, trying to build that relationship, that rapport. And I wanted to make sure that I built that, because I also knew that getting into medical school, you had an interview. The few interviews that I had were really just for high school jobs and college jobs. And that was like a one-on-one, nothing too stressful. So it was something that I wanted to make sure that I honed in and built up. And those social events, those social outings, that was how I learned to expand those skill sets and be able to have conversations with different types of people across all walks of life.
With interviewing, that is an important life skill, because if you can learn how to interview, sometimes it doesn't even matter what your resume looks like. Sometimes if you can just interview well and learn that skill, you can get a lot of places, whether it's graduate school or a job or into an organization. Like that skill is really, really important. And I have been on both sides. I have done a lot of interviewing. I have been an interviewer. I have sat in on interviews, and I have given feedback and gotten feedback. It's a big task. And if you're going to set yourself up and you're going into a process that has an interview, you need to focus on the social aspects. And it's not just, hey, how can I be robotic and answer questions? It's reading the body language, reading the room, being able to be personable and smiling at the right moment and cracking the appropriate joke and so on and so forth.
You got it. You're pointing out exactly what I was going to follow up on. It's not just about answering it the right way and the appropriate way, giving the answer that they want to hear, but it's being able to read the room and flow and actually turn it into a conversation. In my personal view, if you are having a really good interview, it's almost as if you are meeting a new friend, or you're meeting someone out at the bar and you're having this conversation, and they're literally just learning about you and you're learning about them. When you are able to interchange those conversations and those details, and they're willing to give more information about themselves or their job or their position, then you're doing really well in this interview. Like, oh, hey, I'm getting to learn more about the position. I'm learning more about how things work around here. They're giving me answers more than they're asking me questions. That says a lot. That says that you're helping them open up their views and their perspectives about you, and that they're open to your input. Those are the skills that you need to learn. Otherwise, like you said, you are robotic. You can answer it the right way, but a lot of people, especially a lot of good interviewers, they can see right through that. Now that I'm on the other side of it, you can see the ones that have practiced. This is what they're going to say, how they're going to say it. This is the inflection point that they're going to put in their voice. They're going to turn this into a question. They're leading this conversation so that they can ask this next question. You can tell when it's overly practiced.
Yes, you really can. That is something that interviewers can stiff out, because they've done it hundreds of times. They have interviewed, they have seen all of it. They've seen the ass kissing, they've seen the attempt at being intellectual in certain areas where they may not be as knowledgeable. I've interviewed people where they've come in and I know that the industry I was in, whether it was law or aerospace, it's a difficult topic. It took me years to master that topic. And when you ask them a question, you know what answer they should be giving, but they give you an answer that's a little bit too detailed, a little bit too intricate. You're like, you've rehearsed this quite a few times. And then to another one of your points, a piece of advice I've always given in interviewing is if you can walk into an interview as if you were meeting an old friend, that is a good place to put your mind in the right situation. Because if you were going to meet an old friend, you would go in, you'd smile, you'd ask them how their day is, you'd ask them how they'd been, you would be a warmer embrace, a nice handshake, good eye contact. You don't want to act like they're a close friend because close friends crack jokes and make fun of things and say things that are inappropriate. But you also don't want to be at arm's length and be so cold to the interviewer that they just don't want to be there with you. So I always say if you're worried about doing an interview, if you can just approach it like you're meeting up with an old friend and you're just playing catch up, you're not intrusive, but you're still warm. It's a good place to put you in the right mental state to have a good interview and transition into the conversation which you just gave, where it's more of a conversation. It's more of a, you're building rapport and you're communicating. You're not just asking and answering.
What other things did you do to build that resume from college getting into law school? Are there other requirements? Obviously, like you said, well-roundedness. So
Yep.
what sort of organizations did you join? What other things did you do?
I did things that I really was interested in because if I was interested in it, I would be more likely to go do it. I really liked sports, so intramurals, I did flag football, I did basketball, we entered tournaments, just trying to stay in shape and having teams lined up every semester. And that was nice, not only for the resume, because you just put one or two lines on the resume, intramural sport football, intramural sport basketball, intramural sport tennis, but you also were able to put accolades on there. If your team won a championship, or if you won a tournament, or if you were MVP, or if you got an award for maybe having the best attitude on the court, there were things there that you could throw in that are talking points. And a lot of times, the people that are in admissions are trying to find a way to connect. They're trying to find a way to see how you have gone out into the world and you have worked on a team or you had been a leader. So you're just trying to find those dynamics. I also did a semester doing judo. I did a semester doing jujitsu because I wanted to try them both out at the college level. I ended up joining an organization called Psychology in Law. I was a psych and sociology major, and that really, really interested me. It wasn't just something I wanted to do just because it was easy liberal arts degree. I actually really enjoyed the material, and I thought if I never went into law school, I might go try to get a master's or PhD in either one of those disciplines. However, in going with it, I tried to recognize what organization would I want to be a part of, and could I then establish maybe a leadership position in that organization. It was either treasurer or secretary. I want to say it was secretary of the organization. And it was nice. Like we only met up maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks for 30 minutes to just talk about topics at hand. So the organization, we weren't making like this widespread change throughout campus, but it was enough to say, hey, I got into an organization, I ran for a position, we were recognized by the school, and we tried to do things, whatever things were. And sometimes that's all you need. You don't need to have this crazy detail to the organization. You just need to be in it, so to speak. What about you?
I also did the same. I joined several different organizations. Most of them were pre-health or pre-med. But the reason we do that is one, it's a resume booster, but two, they have resources to allow you to build upon that. For pre-meds, it was really important for us to get hands-on experience, whether that is volunteer work, whether that's access to an actual physician that you can shadow. Sometimes it's hard to find those resources and connect with someone to be able to achieve those goals. By joining these organizations where you have seniors who have already gone through the process, who have already applied, have gotten into medical school, they are now then giving their knowledge and passing it down to the lower classmen. I was able to obtain my volunteer position through one of the organizations. I was able to get some board prep because we have to take our MCATs. Those are all these other additional resources, those bonuses for joining these organizations, on top of the socialization, on top of the leadership opportunities. We made sure that we hit all of those things. But at the foundation, the academics is really important. But for medical school, you do have to hit a certain amount of classes for each core subject. You do need to have like 2 semesters of biology, 2 semesters of chemistry, of math, calculus. And so those are all things that are requirements, but it does not mean that you have to be a science major. Nowadays, majority of people who go into medical school, they apply with non-science degrees, but they are still completing the core science courses so that they can then apply.
That's a very good point, and something I didn't even think about is the resources. Having access to the resources that that organization has specialized in, also having the ability to network with people that are going through the process or have gone through the process. Because we did that exact thing during some of our conversations. Hey, have you guys signed up for the LSAT yet? What class are you going to take to do LSAT prep? Where are you applying? How much are the application fees? Having that network, having good mentors. Like we've talked about mentors before in the profession. Other students can be mentors. Your peers can be your mentors if they're upperclassmen, or maybe they've gone through the process and you haven't yet, and they can give you valuable information, valuable information. So that's a very, very good point. I should also say that law school does not have the requirement for any sort of degree. You could literally be any degree you want as long as you get your GPA up and you do your LSAT and you have a bachelor's. You are putting yourself in line to apply to law school. So if you were going to go pre-med and you were looking at chemistry, biology, anatomy, anything of that sort, any science degree, and you said, I just want to go to law school instead, you can easily transition. And that's why law school welcomes a lot of, let's say, diverse personalities that may not want to specialize in a certain area. I would want my doctor to have the foundational classes in undergrad that they would need to be a successful doctor. Law school doesn't necessarily need that. And it's just because, in my opinion, anybody can go through law school. It's just a grind. Can you grind it out? Can you understand the concepts for what doctors and those in the medical field do? There's a lot more there. Be comfortable with certain things. You have to have had the background in the sciences. But for those trying to consider what classes they should take or what majors they should take for law school, just pick one and make sure you're doing well in it.
Was there any sort of requirement to have exposure into law, whether that was being some sort of legal aid, working in a law firm in any capacity? Was there any sort of requirement like that to get into law school?
No. I had never worked for a law firm. I had never interned with a law firm other than my psychology and law interaction. I didn't really engage on a legal perspective. And that's just because I didn't know to. I didn't have the mentors to guide me through. I barely had mentors to get me through college. I really didn't have a mentor to get me through law school. I just didn't know, but it's accessible without all of those things. Now, in today's day and age, it might be a little different because go read a book, go look on the internet, go to the school's website, which is the most modern thing ever, and look at what their admissions requirements are. You have the answers right in front of you if you seek them out. Back then, we didn't really have access to that.
So for medical school, you do have to have some sort of hands-on exposure, whether that is volunteering at a hospital or volunteering at a clinic, working with a physician, something to show that you've had some experience or some exposure, and you understand some of the responsibilities that you would hold as someone working in the medical field. It is a requirement that you have that, and it has become harder and harder, especially with AI coming out now. So the whole scribe employment is harder to find because now people are just using AI to scribe. So there's no need for an in-person human to do that. Volunteering has become a little bit harder after COVID because masking, privacy, things like that is harder. So students have to be more creative these days to make sure that they fulfill that. I was able to obtain my volunteer position at the local hospital. And I didn't have to commit that much time. I spent about 4 to 5 hours once every 2 to 3 weeks at the hospital. And I would work in the emergency room. And all I did was I stocked their cabinets and made sure that they had their blankets, medications, everything that was supposed to be supplied in the room, that it was there. And that anytime any sort of emergency came in, I was allowed to watch ancillary on the outside, obviously not affect any sort of patient care, but I was able to watch all of that and see interactions, interpersonal relationships that everyone had between the nurses, the staff, janitor, the doctor. And so those are the things that medical school is looking for, is that you have that exposure and you understand what you're getting into.
That's That's really interesting and really important. And with what I was just saying a second ago, those things are good from a legal perspective. I don't want to dismiss the fact that if you went and worked for a law firm, it doesn't matter. Yes, working for a law firm, interning, doing all that helps your resume. So
Makes you stand out, I'm sure.
it makes you stand out. It makes the admissions office recognize that you are possibly more dedicated than other individuals who are also applying. Is it needed? Is it required? No, but it definitely does help. That's for any field. This is life advice. If you have a passion for a field and that's where you want to go, try to get into that field as early as possible, whether it's volunteering, whether it's just stocking the cabinets or going to be the intern or running to go get coffee. Finding a way to get in at an early age and just being exposed to everything helps out tremendously when you actually try to break into that field.
How about letter of recommendations? Is that something that you guys needed for applications to law school?
Yes, letter of recommendations are really, really important, but there is a caveat to that. Seeking out the person to write the letter of recommendation because you want somebody who has standing, but you also want somebody who knows you. A lot of people, when they're looking at letters of recommendation, they might just be looking for who has the highest accolade to write this letter of recommendation. And that for some admissions, that's all that's needed. If you get a representative in your state or a senator of your state to write you a letter of recommendation, that says a lot. First off, how do you have access to that individual? But when you dive into it, it could just be that your uncle's sister's cousin's friend knew the senator and was doing them a favor. They may have had no insight as to what you actually accomplished, what you achieved, what your work ethic was like, your education or personal experiences. You want to find a good balance. You don't want your best friend to write it. You don't want your uncle to write the letter of recommendation. You need to find somebody you have that distance with who can actually make a real assessment. That's why professors, teachers, coaches are always really good. People that are in the field. For one of my letters of recommendation, my grandma used to be a nanny. And one of the families that she had nannied for, the mom was a lawyer. And so I had tried to get as much advice from her as possible. She wasn't a formal mentor, but she was a good sounding board, definitely good for guiding me in the right direction. So based on our conversations, I was able to ask her to write me a letter of recommendation. So finding people in the field, you don't want a letter of recommendation from somebody that has no connection to your education or the field. Like, it would be really weird for me to write one of your students a letter of recommendation when I don't have any medical experience whatsoever. You got to keep it in perspective.
And so for medical school, you do have to have several letter of recommendation, usually about 3 to 6, depending on which school, and 1 to 2 of them have to come from a physician. It really reinforces that need for exposure to the field because this is a very big time commitment. If you get into medical school, you're committing at least 7 years at a minimum. So 4 years of medical school, then 3 years of residency. So you have to make sure that you build that rapport with a physician. Now, the skill set that I needed to learn was figuring out how to get those additional letter of recs that were not from physicians. It was easy for physician. I volunteered, I worked with the emergency room doc, or maybe I was in the clinic and, I kept seeing the same physician all the time. So it was really easy to ask those questions, like you said, get mentorship, but it's approaching your professors from your classes because those are going to be the next big letter of recs is that, you take your biology class, your chemistry class, and you're one of 200-300 students if you're at a really big university like ours. So how are you going to be able to stand out? This is where it was really important to find that time to go to their office hours, their lab hours, so that you can ask those additional questions. Whether you needed to know the answer or not, you needed to be there, show up, show your face so that they could recognize you, so that when they're writing that letter, it's not going to be so generic. They need to, like you said, point out skill sets that you have, things that would make you successful in medical school. And that was another thing that you needed to learn. And I wish I had known earlier because I remember scrambling. I think my second to last year of college, I was scrambling to build those relationships so that I could get that letter of rec completed.
And then they feel disingenuous. They feel like you're building the relationship just to get something out of the relationship, which is not a way to live life. You always want to give. If you give, then that gives you the ability to take and ask for things. I remember trying to do the same thing at one point for a letter of recommendation. And I asked somebody, just because I'd had an arm's length interaction with them and I knew that they were qualified to write it. And the response was, "Hey, I'm flattered that you'd ask me, but I don't feel comfortable writing this letter of recommendation because I really don't know you outside of A, B, and C. Although I appreciate it, I'm going to have to pass." And that was eye opening to me. Like, oh, I need to do better at building the rapport. That person, although they gave me the very cookie cutter answer, they may have been insulted that they felt like I was trying to use them. But I've had people approach me asking me for letters of recommendation. And it's usually because we've established a good rapport. Now, what I always ask people for, which is something our listeners should consider, is if somebody asks me for a letter of recommendation, my first question to them is, can you provide me a list of your accomplishments and what you've done within the realm of law school or your first year or undergrad? And the reason being is because I might know them under one umbrella. I might only know you because I've trained you in negotiations and we've done negotiation competitions together. But there's a lot more to you. I always ask for that so then I can comment on it and ask questions and really give a good position of everything that student is about. So if you're ever looking for a letter of recommendation, the easiest way that you can do it, obviously don't write it for them, but if you can give the person a background of what you've done, give them your resume, it can make their job a little bit easier in writing it and then be more willing to write the letter of recommendation because it's a lot of work and people can be busy. If you can help out, it definitely helps you get the letter.
The other thing that we're taught is we should always ask if they are able to write a good letter of recommendation, not just a letter, but a good one, and prefacing it with that term because a lot of professors, they get this all the time, especially if you're in the sciences. You know that the majority of your students are either pre-dental, pre-vet, pre-med, or pre-pharmacy. They're going to be all requesting letter of recommendation. So they have these generic letters already written. They just plug in the names. And so it's really important that you ask if they're able to do a good, not a really good, but a good letter. Other ways you can get letter of recommendations, especially for medicine, is doing research. I was actually able to do some research in the lab at University of Texas, and I was basically just an aide to a graduate student who had their own project, and all I had to go do is a little simple task, whether that was pipetting, putting in numbers, punching in numbers so that the computer can do their magic. And that did all the nitty-gritty work for them so that they can then do the research and work out the numbers and evaluate and process the information. That was one, a really good resume booster. Two, it allowed me to get access to the professor, the one overseeing the graduate student, and get a letter of recommendation from that professor. Then ultimately, you also get placed on any sort of research publications. If anything gets published while you're on the project, your name is now on that publication, which is also a very big resume booster.
It's funny that you say that because I actually did something very similar today. As a 37-year-old who owns my own company, I'm working a land deal or trying to work a land deal. And this whole experience is new. Everything's a learning situation. So one of the partners that I'm working with, who is a lot more familiar with what's going on, he is taking lead on it. And I still want to be involved. I want to get the experience. I want to get that resume point. I want to help see this through. So I asked, what are things that you need that I can do, that I'm capable of doing? I don't want to ruin the deal. I don't want to overstep. But what are those little things that you would need help with right now for me to step in and try to assist and contribute to the deal? And he said, hey, try A, B, and C. We need this done. Wonderful. I'll put in the sweat equity. And now down the line, my resume as an adult can then say that I was involved in this land deal with this development, which then I could put on my website or I could bring up in conversation with other peers and colleagues. So even as an adult, you still can find ways to get into the field and do those little things that keep you engaged and keep you contributing to something, even if you're not at that level yet. And then you get to use that. You get to use that as experience and talking points later on. But Long, I have something that we've missed, and we've talked about this before, your MCAT. We have the LSAT in law school. So for your MCAT, that is almost just as important as your GPA. So it should be at the top of the list. Tell me more about the MCAT.
Basically, don't do what I did, which was I did my courses. I took it at the end of my third year, beginning of my fourth year, and I did not study for it at all. I was like, you know what? I just completed all of my science courses. Everything's fresh in my mind. Let's just take it and see what we do. I did okay. I did well enough, a little above average, but I should have done better. I could have done better. A lot of students nowadays will take prep courses. There are prep courses for these exams, and it's really important to do that. And you basically dedicate 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks, and you're just studying for the MCAT. It's usually over a summer or over a break that you decided to do this. So what I ended up doing is I retook it a year later. I tried to study for it, but it was during the 5th year of my last year where I was doing my art degree. I didn't dedicate as much studying as I should have. I ended up scoring the exact same. So I kind of wasted time, wasted money on trying to retest to get a higher score. And at that point, I decided I'm going to apply now and see what comes of it. If I don't get in, then I'll retry on the MCAT. But it just wasn't worth putting more effort into it. However, that is not how I would recommend our future doctors to pursue the MCAT. You really should dedicate a lot more time. If I could do it again, and if I was told that it was that important, or if I had known better how hard it would be, I would have definitely spent more time to study and put in the effort that I needed to.
I try to keep things in perspective, try to look at my life right now. I am a lawyer. I did graduate. I'm successful. I look at you, same thing. You are a doctor. You did graduate. You are successful. So it's hard to try to lean in on, well, if I could have done it differently, this is what I would have done. Because I think I'm in the position that I always wanted to be in. However, I did the exact same thing. And if I was to go back to give my younger self advice, I did not take a prep course. I actually didn't know prep courses existed for the LSAT. I went to Barnes & Noble. I bought a book that had testing. I went through the book a few times, just answering the questions, reading it, and I went and took the LSAT. And again, I did all right. I did good enough to get into law school. I am a lawyer, so obviously I was able to be successful there. But I remember, like, I need a higher score. Like, there's no way. Again, I did not take a prep course. The second time around, I grabbed that book and I said, I'm going to study harder. And of course, this is all during college. I think it was junior, senior year. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm of age to go out and go to 6th Street. So a lot of distractions. I ended up doing worse the second time around when I took the test. Then I was in complete panic mode because I know I have to submit those scores to law school, and they're going to see that I did worse the second time around. But luckily, my score was good enough to get into law school. I even got a small scholarship, but that's because I had the other areas of the resume to help compensate for the LSAT. When you're looking at your resume, what areas can compensate for other areas that may not be as strong? If you can focus on that, the letters of recommendation, the extracurriculars, sometimes those are good enough to help bring you out of the dust with anything else that you may have not performed well in. If I could go back, I would tell myself to go take a prep course. One thing that we both can comment on, though, is that prep courses can be expensive. Sometimes they're a couple $1,000s. You can take out loans, you can work. I know sometimes that's easier said than done, but if you can't afford a prep course, it's doable. Obviously, it's doable. Go look online, ask friends, borrow resources, do whatever you can to get as much experience with that test as possible to try to put yourself in the best possible position. You don't need a prep course to be successful. I would highly recommend a prep course, though, if it's something that is affordable and achievable and fits with what you can accomplish.
The repetitive thing is repetition. The more questions that you can answer that are similar to the exams that you're preparing for, the better. Once you get into medical school, once you get into residency, these are the exams that you still are pursuing. You're still having to study for. And the way we study for it in medical school and in residency is that we just do thousands and thousands of questions. The more questions that we can see, the way the question is structured, the type of answers, the multiple choices that are there, it also helps you test better. It helps you evaluate the question appropriately. And that way, when it comes down to a question that you have no idea, you can at least make an educated guess. And so the more questions that you can see, the better. The other thing I wanted to bring up, though, is that unspoken skill that we all learn is rising up from adversity. As you can see, Lawyer Nik and I have talked about things that we have done wrong, and we didn't allow it to define us. We allowed it to make us stronger and better and be better in our application and building our persona and our resume. We rose up from that so that we could become better from it. We didn't allow it to keep us down, because sometimes when you fail an exam or maybe you don't get in on the first try, some people then curl up into a ball and they're like, you know what, the world is against me. I spent all this time, I failed, and they can't get out. They can't pull themselves out. And so it's really important to find that resilience, because guess what? Law school is not easy. Medical school is not easy. It only gets harder from there. So through all these successes, you're competing with the top of the top. But the reason they're at the top of the top is because they are striving for perfection. but we've all been through it. We've all failed at some point. It's about rising from that failure. That is really important.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. You really have to take a hard look at yourself. You have to be very introspective and give yourself the feedback. It may not be easy to give yourself the feedback, but you need to face it. Another point to that, what's important is having a social circle that can hold you accountable and help bring you up. Sometimes when you're doing things by yourself, it's really, really hard. When you're in the mud and the muck and you're trying to pull yourself up, it's on you to make the decision, but others can really help. Like I had you, I had my family, I had other friends that when I would get down, I had somebody there to comment and say, hey, look, it's not the end. You're good. This is what you need to do. And you fight through it and you'll get there. That's a good segue into my final position, which has a lot of weight. We've talked about GPA really important. We've talked about testing, LSAT, MCAT, really important. We've talked about letters of recommendation. We've talked about internships and working and trying to find your way into the workforce as far as defining the fact that you can lead and work and listen and so on and so forth. One of the most important parts is finding a way to be diverse. And I'm not talking about necessarily skin color. I'm not talking about religion. Those things can all help. Being first generation can help. Speaking other languages can help. Having different experiences because of where you grew up or where you were born can definitely help. Those aren't limiting factors. I've been a gamer before. You've been a gamer. Go on side quests and find those things to make you diverse, to make you stand out in the sense where other people may not have that same side quest that they've gone out to do. So even when you're compared against people that look like you or have the same resume as you, what side quest did you do that then pull you just a step ahead of them? For you, one of your side quests was art. You were very good at art and it helped you stand out. You've mentioned this before on previous podcasts. It helped you stand out in the interview process because not a lot of science types, not a lot of STEM types are artists. It's two different parts of your brain that you're working with, and you were able to really leverage that in your med school application and admissions process. Side quests and finding ways to be diverse, not in the traditional sense, but finding a way to stand out is really, really important and can make you a really, really strong candidate.
And making sure that it's not a detriment to your actual education. Though some people go too far and they focus in on that diversity and they focus in on trying to stand out so much that their actual scores, their testing scores, their GPA then starts to struggle. And so it is a really important fine balance between the two for sure.
It's a very good point when you're looking at not letting it impact your path so much that you lose sight of what the end goal is.
So, what skills did you pick up in law school? Is there anything that prepared you for the real world? What are the things that you picked up during law school that helped you interview well for your big boy job?
The skills that I was able to pick up, one, being socially adept, figuring out how to communicate with a bunch of different people because you never know who the interviewer is on the other side. So being able to work with a variety of different people is important. Being able to communicate, for most people, they don't understand active listening and active communication. You have to speak, but you also have to listen. You have to listen to what somebody's saying. You have to engage with that. That's very important. In law school, we do something called the Socratic method, which is when you're briefing a case, you stand up in front of the entire class. It could be 20 people, it could be 90 people, and you're going toe to toe with the professor. And the professor is a lot more knowledgeable than you. And you may have just read the case for the last 20 minutes and now you're briefing it. So you get a lot of feedback as to what you've done wrong, what you've done right, and you have to be able to take that feedback. And it helps with rising past that adversity. It helps with when you're in the courtroom and the judge wants to ream into you and dress you down. It helps when you're getting dressed down by a client. So feedback, being able to accept it and be actionable about it. And that's good feedback. Like some feedback is crap feedback. You shouldn't listen to it. But for the most part, you need to recognize that. But yeah, it was a lot of speaking, a lot of communicating, a lot of building confidence and recognizing the fact that you can do the job. What about you guys for leading into your residency? Because again, you have residency, but leading into your residency and then leading into being a doctor.
We're constantly working towards that higher next step in our career ladder. For us, after you get into medical school, your goal is to then to get into residency. And it's the same building blocks. You are still needing to focus in on getting letter of recommendations. You want to make sure that you're testing really well. it's really important that you pass. It's less important that you are at the top of your class unless you're looking to get into the really high intense residencies or specialties. So, like if you're going into orthopedics, if you're going into dermatology, ophthalmology, those are residencies or specialties that require that you are at the top of your class. So, it's really important that you score really well. And like I said, going from college into medical school, you are now down to 1 or 2 exams per course that will make or break you. And then during that, you have your big board exams during the end of your second year, your third year, and your fourth year. And so these are exams that are the foundation of your medicine. So everything that you've learned on those first 2 years builds into those board exams. A lot of recommendations. You are also still building your resume. So you want to make sure that you're joining organizations that reflect your interests. If you're into family medicine, if you're into surgery, you want to make sure you join those student organizations that show that. You want to make sure that you're doing volunteering. Some people need research. It's all the same sort of accolades that you're obtaining in college, except now you're obtaining it in medical school. But the more important thing, the more important skill set that you learn is working in a team fashion, because in your third and your fourth year, you're going out and doing rotations in different specialties. You're going out and you're getting experience. But not only that, people are evaluating your ability to interact with patients, working on a team with other physicians, other staff members, other residents, and seeing how you integrate into that team. Because before you can become a leader, which is what physicians are built to become, leader of that medical team, you have to first be able to work as a team, be a follower first, and learn and understand the intricacies. Those are the most important skills that I learned and picked up on during my 4 years of medical school, is learning to listen, learning to communicate appropriately, learning to ask questions when it's needed. And so once you get into residency, now you're building on not only your medical knowledge, but you're building on those leadership skills, because that is then going to lead you out into your big adult job so that you can lead your patients and your family in the right direction.
Very good points. And I know that in my response, I was talking about soft skills. I agree complete with everything that Dr. Long said as far as law school. You want to make sure that you get the best GPA that you can. You want to make sure that you are putting yourself in the best possible position as far as your class ranking, building those accolades for jobs outside of law school. We've talked in other podcasts of being in the top 10 students at the school can then open doors to big law or more prestigious clerkships or other careers. So the academic accolades are also very, very important. Law school specifically, you might look at doing journals where it might be the law journal where you're writing research and legal articles. You have different journals at different schools and those get published. Those are important. Being part of clinics and being in different organizations and being in leadership positions in those organizations, they all help. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity there to talk about just the general things. The overall big one is pass the bar. You've gotten through law school, but if you're wanting to be a lawyer, you need to do what's right to pass the bar, whether that's taking the 3 months to really do a prep course, taking it multiple times if needed. Do what you can to pass the bar the first time. You've spent all this time trying to be a lawyer. You can now go out and practice law. So that is our episode of the Medical Legal Brief with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik, where medicine meets the law. If you like what you heard, please like, comment, and subscribe. Give us a follow, engage with us. Hopefully our listeners got a lot out of today's episode. If you want any advice, please reach out. We have no problem giving advice as long as it's not medical or legal. With that, we hope you guys have a good day and we will see you next week. Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.